Welcome to the Legal Insurrection podcast. Today is November 22nd, and this is episode 17. I'm Kimberly Kay, Editorial and Operations Director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor William Jacobson. So let's go ahead and jump in. We have a lot to cover. First, a little bit of housekeeping. It'll probably be a couple weeks before we come back, just because for Thanksgiving being next week, and then we will be traveling for work-related things the following week. So just to get that out of the way, if there's not an update beyond this one for a couple of weeks, we have not abandoned you, nor have we forgotten about you. We are just busy. So keep that in mind. As always, so much to talk about. I think first and foremost, something that kind of blew up the internet yesterday was Trump's Attorney General pick, Matt Gaetz, withdrew. And it seemed to be, at least as far as I can tell, based on the sources that I have, it seemed to be very much a surprise to many people, at least on the inside, who thought that they would somehow be able to whip the votes in order to get him through the confirmation process. What were your initial thoughts on that?
Well, Gates was always a strange pick, an odd pick, one that didn't make any superficial sense, but we talked about this last time. I think Trump wanted somebody completely loyal to him in that position, given the history of the DOJ trying to sabotage the first Trump administration. So at that level, perhaps Gates made sense, but there was always going to be a difficulty because he's made a lot of enemies within the Republican Party when he blew things up to get McCarthy out as Speaker. And that's the House, but nonetheless, that created a lot of enemies. And he's had that investigation. Yes, it did not result in any criminal charges being filed, but there was also an ongoing House report. And so was that going to leak out? So there was always a bunch of stuff floating around. But the bottom line is that they didn't have the votes. There were 5, I believe, hard no's among Republicans, and Republicans can only afford 3. So you can get to a 50-50 split, and the vice president, being J.D. Vance, cast the deciding vote, the tiebreaker, like Kamala Harris has done gazillion times for the Democrats. So the votes weren't going to be there. There were 5, I believe, hard no's, people whose minds were never going to be changed.
Well, and part of, to me, what is so frustrating, number one, I think he should have stuck in longer for a handful of reasons. They were out for blood and they got it, And the thing is, like we've talked about, I think at least in the last 2 episodes, if they had something damning, we would have seen it by now. They would have cut him off as soon as they could have. I've seen so many different speculations and theories about what really happened behind the scenes. I mean, I have no idea the veracity of these claims, but they seem to indicate it's not whatever it has nothing to do with the ethics charges that are being floated around. I still, again, believe if they had something enough to take him out, they would have done that. It would have been in their best interest to do that, and then they could claim a scalp. What really frustrates me about this, though, is the fact that, once again, Republicans are their own worst enemy. Like him or not, there is definitely a mandate in this election. There is a desperate need for Trump to have people that he can trust, people who will go in and just torch these institutions, because the institutions have failed us as a country. The institutions are the problem. And when I say institutions, I include the political institutions and the party structure on both sides of that. And so from the get-go, we have 5 senators who have blocked together and who are willing to tank some of this agenda of the incoming administration. It's just so frustrating. I mean, we have seen this movie before. And for the life of me, I don't understand. And I think, again, like we had talked about a little bit last time, there's still a massive disconnect between the people in Washington, the entrenched establishment, politicians, and what the people want. It's part of why we are where we are. I understand there's much more nuance there, but it is a huge piece of the puzzle, and we're not even into confirmation hearings, and now they're blocking together to ice out people with whom they're not thrilled.
Yeah. I mean, Republicans in the Senate are just the worst. They really are. Biden's been pushing through some truly radical judges because our people don't show up to vote no.
Oh, I know.
Okay. What
Come
is
on.
that nonsense? We could block it because we have 50 votes because I think it's Cinema is voting no on all these people. And so it would be 50-50, and Kamala is nowhere to be found, so she can't cast the tiebreaker. But we don't show up. We have 1 to 3 to 4 senators who don't bother to show up. And key picks, including one on the 11th Circuit, which is where all the appeals out of Florida go, have just been filled with a Biden nominee because we didn't show up. Okay.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz didn't show up. Okay. I think Steve
Get it
Daines
together,
was the other
Texas.
one.
Come on.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Ted Cruz didn't show up. That's inexcusable. Okay. And but when do you ever get this with the Democrats? You have a new president coming in, and what's the first thing the Democrat um, senators do? Well, I know what they don't do. They don't start organizing to sink Biden's or Obama's nominees. That's not the first thing they do. But Republicans, the first thing they do is organize to sink Trump nominees they don't like. It's really pathetic. It's why Trump has taken over the Republican Party, or most of it. But the last vestiges of that old school republicanism really is in the Senate, and it's just so frustrating. And it's why the Republican Party doesn't do better than it has been doing, because they constantly are trying to undermine the objectives, and trying to, exercise their muscles, not against Democrats, but against other Republicans. It's just pathetic.
Well, I mean, there's just so much infighting, so much inability to work together to accomplish a shared goal. I know there's always been many rifts throughout, at least modernity, concerning the internal party workings, but especially post Tea Party, those who have been around since that time, the Republicans who were part of, what we always called the establishment GOP, have become just truly insufferable. I mean, you have people like McConnell who are always, I mean, they were a little squishy, more towards the middle, who have now become the ones tanking things for everyone else. And Texas needs to do better there. Like they have to, because there's no excuse for this. There's really not. We have one shot at this, and the stakes are so high, astronomically high. And like we've talked about before, I mean, our country literally came to the very edge of the cliff, and we essentially have 2 years to get done what must be done. And that these people are standing up and refusing to um, agree to anything outside. And what they want ultimately is control. They want things to stay the way that they are. They don't want any challenges to the existing power structure. And it's just so frustrating to watch this song and dance happen over and over and over again. But anyway, so moving on to Gates withdrew, Gates, I don't even know, whatever, withdrew, and then Trump tapped Pam Bondi as his replacement, and we've seen her. She was another Trump, an attorney that actually worked to represent Trump. What did you think of that replacement?
It's probably as good as you're going to get. I mean, Republicans unfortunately don't have a deep bench. I think she'll be fine. I think people were talking about the Attorney General from Missouri, who I think probably substantively or legally would do better. He's the one who brought the lawsuit, some major lawsuits challenging the Biden administration, including the one regarding Facebook censorship. Okay, that
Right.
was the Missouri Attorney General, has really been a leader in the Republican resistance to Biden, and has brought some very successful lawsuits. I think he would have been good too. But Bondi, I think, is more of Trump world. She
Yeah.
was one of the people who defended him in, I can't remember if it was the first or the second impeachment trial. I think it was the first one. She was one of the not floor manager, but one of the counsel to the Republican House team. So she's more of Trump world. I know some people weren't thrilled with her as Florida AG. Some people were. That's water under the bridge to me.
Yeah.
I think she will be loyal to Trump to the extent of not allowing DOJ and the FBI to secretly sabotage him. Okay.
Yes.
Um, doesn't mean she's got to, sway the wheels of justice. But what I think she will prevent happening, what happened his first term, where the entirety of the DOJ bureaucracy was weaponized to subvert a sitting president they didn't like, and that continued after he left office. So I think that's going to come to a stop. I'm hopeful. I don't know that I've heard her say anything. I'm very hopeful that she will go after some of these people, not for retribution, but because they deserve to be investigated. Let's
Yes.
apply the same rules to everybody. So she's very in Florida. I think had a real, like law enforcement, uh, anti-immigration, anti-illegal immigration sort of posture. So I think she's probably as good as we're going to get. So, and I'm not sure who else would be better.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, I know there's a lot of names
Important,
that have
one
been.
more thing. She's a good communicator. That's
Yeah.
something Republicans have never been able to do. You look at who gets in front of the TV cameras for the Democrats and compare it to our people, and it's pathetic. She will be a good communicator, and that's important in this environment.
Oh, for sure. And Republicans are always waxing on about tax policy. No one cares about that. Like, they just don't. I mean, whether you're going to raise them or lower them, sure, but all the intricacies of tax policy and things like that, and that's just constantly missing the mark. But anyway, um, so we do have a Department of Education head, Linda McMahon, um, which was an interesting pick. But what did you think about that?
Yeah, so here's where I go pun crazy. Yeah, I think she will do a good job wrestling with the bureaucracy over Department of Education. For those of you who don't know, I don't know if she was the founder, her husband was, they were co-founders, but it's World Wrestling, is it Federation? I'm not really sure what it's called, but the big wrestling group, the big professional wrestling group. Um, you know, uh, she basically ran it. That's where they made a fortune. She's been very big donor to the Republican causes and candidates. She is very involved with the America First Policy Institute, I believe, um, which was created really as a holding bin for potential Trump nominees down the road and staffers. Um, Correctly, and this was worthwhile, correctly recognizing that people coming out of the first Trump administration were not going to have many job opportunities because they'd be blacklisted and
Hmm.
because there were groups organized specifically to make sure that anyone who served in the Trump administration never worked again. I mean, that's the Democrats, okay? Um, Organized efforts. They, and I think maybe one or two other groups, were created for the purpose of giving people policy experience, but also policy employment uh, in light of those cancel culture stuff. So she's very tied in, and I think from that institute, you'll probably see a fair number of people go into the administration. So it will have served its purpose, basically. Um, and so I think I don't know. She doesn't have like a hugely deep education background, but I'm not sure that's what you need. I mean, she's on board with the agenda. I think she's very pro school choice. I'm hopeful she'll read some of our stuff and some of the steps we have urged Department of Education to take to get rid of this DEI stuff.
Hmm.
Hopefully, um, our voices will be heard there. I don't know if they will, but so I think she'll be fine. I think she'll be fine. There's no perfect pick for anything, and given that her goal is to scale back or eliminate's probably unrealistic, but scale back or eliminate the Department of Education. I'm not sure you need somebody who comes in with a whole lot of policies they want to add, which will require more people and more budget.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I, she may be able to slam that department to the mat.
Give us all the dad jokes you have here. Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I mean, I know the typical trajectory of some of these things are people who have been angling for administrative positions, people who have worked within these agencies, which is exactly the problem, you know. And I know I talked about it before, but Jim Garrity of National Review, who covers their election beat, um, wrote a fantastic book probably about a decade ago. It was meant to be fiction. It's called The Weed Agency. And he really takes a lot of shots at how the bureaucracy works, how they're constantly justifying their own existence, the lengths that they go to maintain a budget. If you have worked in any government entity, if you've worked in higher education, if you've worked in any of these spheres, you know exactly what he's talking about there, and it's 100% true. None of which are really accomplishing the point, the goal, the mission of the agency or the entity itself. But anyway, so I think it'll be, I mean, again, like we talked about last time, if the goal is to burn everything to the ground, so much the better. I mean, she's smart, she's sharp, she's savvy. That's really all you need to go in and gut something like this, too. Um, so and then the last pick I want to talk about today is the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, and
I don't know a
whether.
lot about him. He's a fracking company executive. He's apparently, says things to placate the climate people, but also says things that are very pro energy, very pro fossil fuel usage.
Mhm.
So he's probably as good as anybody for that role.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about him. I have not had a lot of time to turn towards looking into some of these picks that I was not already familiar with. But you know, I mean, I trusted his judgment here. Um, Quickly before we talk about a couple other things, a couple of other case related things, status of lawfare against Trump. You know, this was hot and heavy in the media, was salivating over all of these. I'll throw a pun for you, all these trumped up charges against President Trump. And, you know, all of those seem to have mostly petered out up to this point. So, what do you have for us there? What is your Can we pick your brain on what's happening in some of those cases?
Well, it doesn't look like any of them are going anyplace. The Florida Mar-a-Lago raid case was thrown out with the finding that Jack Smith was not properly and constitutionally appointed. The appeal has been abandoned post-election after Trump won the election. I haven't seen the document, but I've read that that the DOJ withdrew their appeal. So that's gone. The DC case is pretty much gone. I think there have been reports in the media that DOJ is going to move to end the case one way or another. All scheduling matters have been put on hold. It could not possibly get to trial before the inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they're going to put it on ice for 4 years. So the DC case is not even on life support. I mean, it's basically on its way out. Georgia is going nowhere fast. I read that the Georgia Appeals Court, which was supposed to make the argument in the motion to disqualify Fannie Willis as the prosecutor in that TV made for TV drama, uh, you know, and
Lifetime special.
that's been postponed. Okay, so I don't think that's going anywhere. I mean, they don't even have a prosecutor in place, and he's about to take office. That case is
Mm-hmm.
going nowhere. Now it could go someplace against the other defendants, but is the state really going to do that? Let's see. Um, and then there is the Alvin Bragg case that um, the books and records case, okay, the hush money case, which makes it sound very dramatic, um, which never should have been brought, never should have been prosecuted, never should have been convicted, and right now is probably going to be put on hold, at minimum, hold indefinitely. The most recent news is that the judge has canceled the argument on sentencing, or canceled the sentencing hearing, and issued a briefing schedule that goes into December on Trump's motion to completely dismiss the case. I don't think the judge ever ruled on immunity based on the Supreme Court's ruling. He was supposed to. So that's probably not going to go anywhere. Okay. And so, from a criminal point of view, Trump will have beaten one way or another all of the cases. He still has, still waiting to hear on his civil case by Letitia James, where the court fined him like 300 million or 400 million, some crazy amount where nobody lost a pen, crazy amount under consumer statute that has never before, and this is the point made by the appeals court judges during the oral argument, a statute that's a consumer protection statute that has never before been applied to a business transaction between sophisticated business people, both of whom were represented by counsel in the transaction,
Right.
where there were express disclaimers that the supposed fraud, the overvaluation of real estate properties, express disclaimers that you cannot rely on what we say and you have to
Mhm.
evaluate it yourself, which of course is standard practice. I mean, you go to get a mortgage on your house. The bank doesn't ask you, what do you think your house is worth? Oh, okay, then we'll give you a loan. No, they do their own appraisal. So the banks had counsel, had real estate professionals, did their own evaluations. There was an express disclaimer that they were not relying on what Trump said.
Mhm.
Sophisticated people, and most important, nobody lost money.
Yeah.
None of the loans were defaulted. They all got paid back with interest. None of the banks involved complained. Okay.
Mhm.
And basically the judges said to the attorney general's office, it wasn't Letitia James arguing it, but whoever was arguing it for that office, like, has this ever happened in the history of the world that you've
Yeah.
brought such prosecution? Okay. And they also emphasized, particularly when it's on a subject that is inherently subjective, which is what is a property worth, and there's different ways to value it, and so I expect that that will get thrown out. It was an abuse of the statute. Unfortunately, a weak Supreme Court justice presiding in New York State. The Supreme Court is the lowest court. Just to confuse everybody, the New York State Supreme Court is the trial court. It's the lowest court. Okay, the Court of Appeals is the highest court. And then there's an intermediary appellate division. So I think he's going to come out of it. Now, we still got the defamation case. I forget who
Mhm.
it's by, that woman, where there was some crazy jury verdict. And then he was sued a second time with more damages, like in a prompt sort of trial, not even like a whole case.
Mhm.
Because after the verdict, he basically said he disagreed with the verdict and it wasn't true and he didn't sexually assault this woman. Oh, there's another defamation. I mean, this
Right.
is so, I don't know what's going to happen with that one. I haven't heard as much on the appeals, but he will have survived the lawfare.
Yeah. Which is remarkable. I mean, the number of attacks that have been thrown at this man, both physical and otherwise, and he's still standing and he's still serving. Whatever you think of him, that's pretty remarkable.
And it's
Um,
why he's going to be president again.
yes, exactly. 100% why, because he's one of the only, he is, you know, the public figure that has withstood everything that everyone else is afraid of in this country. All of the cancellation attempts, all of the lawfare, the literal assassination attempts, and he is still standing, and he's kind of become a figure in that way. And so, yeah, I think again, regardless of what you think of him, you can't. That's just the way it is. Um, the ICC, who I think about in the same way that I think about the UN, they're just a ridiculous body of governance, if you can even call them that. Indicted Bibi and his defense minister. Tell us about that. That's not a story I've, so that I know you have.
Yeah, International Criminal Court was created by the Rome Statute, I believe, in 1998. So it is an international treaty. Who is not a member of it? Who did not join it? The United States,
Mm-hmm.
China, India, and several other countries, including Israel. Why did they choose not to join it? Because they knew what you were doing. You were creating a, I'm not sure what the right word is, an international body accountable to nobody who would
Yep.
have the right to arrest leaders of countries on war crimes and crimes against humanity charges. And that what would go wrong with it is exactly what you're seeing go wrong with with Israel.
Yes,
A
exactly.
biased prosecutor with a history of being anti-Israel who curiously sought the arrest warrants right when he was being charged with sexual harassment. Okay, nice way to distract from that. And a biased international organization, which, like almost every, if not every, international organization has been corrupted from within, like the United Nations. I mean, the United Nations Human Rights Council has some of the worst human rights abusers on it. And so the US said, we're not going to submit ourselves to the jurisdiction of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it is against United States law to enforce any of the judgments or any of the warrants that the ICC issues.
Right.
And so they decided that they were going to bring this. And so Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, and I'm forgetting his first name, Gallant, the defense minister, who, for the actions of the IDF post October 7 in Gaza, they have, to the best we can tell, relied almost entirely on corrupt international human rights groups, which are nothing like you would think they were. Amnesty International is corrupt as anything now. It
They're
is just an
terrible.
anti-Israel group. Human Rights Watch, the founder of it, resigned because it had become so obsessed with Israel. These are
Mm,
groups that publish misinformation and a few other. There's even one or two Israeli human rights groups that just produce fabricated or distorted information. And that's who they rely on. They did no independent investigation. And the main charge they've brought against them is using starvation as a tactic, as a military tactic. And there's been no starvation in Gaza. Not a single person has died of starvation. The pictures that Bernie Sanders and others show on the floor of the House and the Senate are not of a starving Palestinian child. It's a Palestinian child who has a debilitating neurological condition for which Israel gave him medical attention. And so, what you see in that picture is a child withering away from a neurological condition. And Bernie Sanders, one of the most despicable people in this country, holds
yes.
that up to show that Israel is starving children to death in Gaza. Really terrible man, terrible, terrible man. And so it's a complete fabrication. It's a complete hoax. It's a complete corruption. And I think what you're going to see, and what I hope you see, is the U.S. under Trump and the Senate and the House under Republicans gutting the ICC with sanctions.
Oh, I hope
Nobody
so.
affiliated with it being allowed to enter the United States. Anyone who cooperates with it being treated the way we treat somebody who gives material support to a terrorist group, criminalizing it, really needs to collapse that court, because the fears we had when we refused to join it have come true. And it's even worse. It's even more of a threat now because they don't even have jurisdiction over Israel because Israel's not a member. So if they can issue an arrest warrant for Bibi Netanyahu, they can issue an arrest warrant for Donald Trump.
Yep. Yep. 100%. God, they're the worst. Always have been. Um, but yeah, I hope that's on Trump's agenda too, to just really take an axe to that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, we can't axe it in the sense that we don't finance it, but we can impose the sort of sanctions on it we would impose on a major terrorist group. Look at whatever sanctions we have in Al Qaeda; those should be imposed on the ICC.
right. No, I completely agree. Completely agree. Last but not least, the Daniel Penny trial that's been happening, which is just such an abomination. And again, like with many of these things, we have seen this show before. Um, what are your thoughts on how that's playing out currently?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow because it's not live streamed. So,
Right,
unlike the Zimmerman trial, we can't watch it, we can't hear the evidence. We only know what's reported. And what's reported, New York Post has done a lot of reporting on this. Um, shows really an abomination. Shows um, somebody who did not actually cause the death of this man. There was, and I don't remember the details, but the original medical examiner report did not attribute the death to the so-called chokehold, and only after she watched the video changed her mind. But
right,
you're a medical examiner. You're supposed to be doing it based on your findings, not watching TV. Okay. So the cause of death is disputed. The defense has called witnesses, expert witnesses, saying that based on the medical evidence, that the chokehold was not the cause of death. It was some combination of other diseases the guy had, high drug use, and other things he was taking. There's been a lot of testimony, again, according to what's been reported, of other people being frightened of this man in the subway car. For those of you who don't remember, I guess I'm assuming people remember, this is the guy who, in a um, drug induced, homeless, um, criminal, was harassing people and threatening to kill them on the subway car and saying he
hmm
doesn't care if he dies, he's going to attack them. These are, people locked in a subway car with no way to get out and run. Daniel Penny wrestled him to the ground, put him in a hold. I don't think it was technically a chokehold, but put him in a hold. We now know, based on the trial evidence, that he was alive when the police arrived and when he was taken to the hospital, meaning the guy, I don't even remember his name, who was threatening people and died subsequently. And, you know, it's just a really horrible situation where you have somebody violently threatening others. Those others are in fear of their life. Daniel Penny comes to their assistance and wrestles the guy to the ground. And uh, it is in many ways, I think, going to come down to a George Floyd style argument. Well, okay, it was all right for you to wrestle him to the ground. You shouldn't have held him that long. Okay. But the
right.
video shows him struggling, and maybe you held him too long. That's where I always felt in the George Floyd trial, the problem was for the defense, for Chauvin, is that you could certainly justify Floyd being taken to the ground given his conduct and maybe even
Right.
held there for a while. But at a certain point, you ease up a little bit, okay?
Right.
And so, I think that, but we also have a racial reality here. There are protesters, just like there were at George Floyd. There are, it's a circus. There's a lot of political pressure, which the jury has to know about. And the reality is, you have a racially charged case of a white man killing a black man in New York City, in a case which has garnered the attention of the race activists
Yeah.
demanding justice. And there is a very high percentage, the evidence be damned, that he's going to be convicted.
Yeah. Which is just, it's so atrocious. It's another chipping away at a right to defense, you know, to not have to be threatened. And if someone is attacking you, someone is physically threatening your person, verbally threatening your person, and you take any action to neutralize the situation, you could be on trial. And it's just, it's
And
horrendous.
people always say, why didn't someone help her? Why didn't someone come to her? Well, this is why. because you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison if some prosecutor, politicized prosecutor, this is an Alvin Bragg prosecution, a politicized prosecutor, race activists, and a jury who feels that pressure is going to convict you. And so, yes, you're going to save that nice lady over there from being attacked by this man, but you're going to spend, not that guy, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And that's why people don't step up.
Yep.
That's why
No,
people don't help out.
I completely agree. And I also think that's 100% the point too. You know, if your goal is to try and normalize or bring chaos in a way that destroys institutions and destroys and rips away at the fabric of our foundational beliefs, this is part of how you do that. You know, you create an atmosphere of fear in many different ways. You create an atmosphere where people are not even able to exercise their right to protect their person or someone else or their family. And then people like this show up and everyone just has to, or not everyone has to, but it's not surprising that people would choose not to engage in hostile or to try and neutralize a threat or engage with someone who's behaving in a way that's threatening for fear of repercussion. It's a different kind of cancellation. And it's so terrible. I hate cases like this so much because it also undermines faith in the system. You know, you're supposed to be able to do these things in our country. You're supposed to be able to defend yourself. It's enshrined in our Constitution, obviously. And to not be able to do that, or worse, to spend your entire life behind bars because you tried to help out, it's horrifying. It's literally the thing that nightmares are made of. So, but I think that's all we have for today. Want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and remind you to have a great time with your family. Ignore the haters and just enjoy that we live in such an amazing country. And one of the things I love most about Thanksgiving, it is a nationally recognized and sanctioned holiday where we take time to give thanks and praise to God for all that he has done, for his provision, for his blessings. And I hope that that's the reflection this year too. You know, not just the pie and the family, but just that no matter how bad things are and how bleak things look, there's always hope. There's always an opportunity to turn things around. And so I know that's where my thoughts are, at least this year. So y'all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will be back in a few weeks. You can find links to everything we discussed today and more information about Legal Insurrection and this podcast at legalinsurrection.com/17. Y'all take care and happy Thanksgiving. Bye.